When I had mentioned that question about did you ever notice anyone recognizing something with you? Did anyone say anything? Because a lot of times people outside of the person who's experiencing some of those struggles may notice something may not be right. And it sounds like you, I think from what you're sharing, and you're not alone in this either, because people will say this quite often. It took every bit of energy I had to make sure that I put the facade on, the face, the mask that says, I'm good. I'm good here. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. I'm fine. Even though inside, if I took that down, peeled the mask back a little bit, not so fine. Today, not so fine. In fact, sometimes it may have been, some people are really behind that mask, certain times are screaming behind that mask. I am not fine. And that's where I think these conversations, we can actually give people permission to say something. If we notice someone, a friend of ours, that's just not maybe in their best place at that particular day. Now, again, sometimes people just have a moment. We all have moments. We might snap, we might be short, might be impatient, may not be ourselves, and it may not be anything in particular than just a couple stressors. But if there may be something else going on. We all have different stories happening in our lives that most people don't ever know. And so it gives us an opportunity to ask someone to check in with them, particularly if you know someone really well. Because if someone's struggling and they think that someone might know that I'm struggling, but they're not asking about it, sometimes the perception is that, well, maybe they do notice, but they're not necessarily checking in with me, or do they care about what's happening with me? Even though that's not the case, because the flip side of that is from someone else, it can be very difficult to ask someone, so how are you doing? Are you okay? Because that invites an answer. And if someone then says, well, I'm not doing well, sometimes that can be uncomfortable. But these conversations we're having, starting off today, Darryl, this gives people that permission to say, if we're going to change the culture of mental health and good mental health and well-being and lifting each other up, then we have to give ourselves permission to say, you know what, there are days that I'm not going to be at my best self. I'm not going to be my best place, and I might need a little support along the way. And that's okay. When I shared a little bit with the film screening and they featured Michael Phelps, and Michael Phelps talked about his darkest moments. And he talked about what he learned when he went and started talking to someone in therapy, much like you're doing within the work you're doing with Katie, was I had to give myself permission for two things. I needed to stop pushing things down because there was no more room at the inn. Everything was just coming up. And so I needed to do that. I needed to reach out, and I needed to be a little bit vulnerable to do that. And then he said, I needed to also give myself permission to recognize that it's okay to not be okay. There are certain days that it's okay not to be okay. And that's a truth for all of us, but it's very hard sometimes to say, okay, today I'm not going to be quite okay, or I'm not okay, and that's okay not to be all right. We're talking about our own self-compassion and grace with ourselves, because if anything, right now during COVID-19 and the pandemic, that self-compassion piece, giving ourselves a little grace and a little wiggle room, is most important now more than ever. But it has always been important. And so when we're struggling, it's an opportunity to try to make sure that we're leaning on one another. That can be difficult, but also lifting each other up at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the facade, and that definitely hits home with me. And I wanted to mention that before we finish today.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I would go to great lengths and great energy to fake being okay. And everybody that does that should get an Oscar, because you're acting all day, 24/7, maybe, depending on, where you are and who you're around. And so like I would notice myself, my thoughts drifting while having conversations with people, like just totally lose my focus and almost not even hear what they say, stuff that I'm supposed to do, whether it's for work or otherwise, just, something that seems obvious, just totally forgetting. And my mind would, like when I'd be in the height of the problem, would just be totally somewhere else, just like off in the clouds is how I describe it. But
Yeah.
the kind of I hate to use the word faking, but the hiding it, really, I think I'm pretty confident that my issue last year started with burnout and exhaustion, and
Yeah.
that affects how you interpret things, and then it just spirals from there. It's a snowball effect.
Yep.
But the hiding it and the acting and putting on a front, that is like the most exhausting thing. And when you're around people every day and trying to pretend that everything's okay, and then, for me, that burnout and that exhaustion, that would snowball. And it was just a vicious, absolutely vicious cycle. So for anybody that can identify with the hiding and trying to put on, the happy face, the brave face, like there's a lot of people that know how you feel, including me.
Yeah. And I would say, including me, there are times, and all of us are part of that. And I think it's huge for you to point that out, because when someone's struggling, you talked about burnout. Burnout is a very relevant and timely topic also, given everything that we're going through, even through this pandemic. But even before that, so you were talking about being exhausted, emotionally exhausted. I think that absolutely could lead to and be in combination with making things even worse on the depression and anxiety side. They kind of are intertwined. But when you talked about putting on that mask and just that faking and just, hey, I'm good, nothing to see here. Inside, you said that was even more exhausting. So think about that. You're already exhausted. You're burning out, well beyond crispy around the edges on the cookie that really started out really well, but now way too long in the oven. So crispy around the edges, and it's burning. And if you don't do something with that in that oven, you're the cookie. It's not going to end well. And so I think it's even more depleting of your energy. It's taking everything you have. So the little energy that you have some days is then put on the facade, the mask, the faking. And so it's like, then you almost have zero reserve in your fuel tanks to actually do the things that you want to be doing, because you're putting your energy in this false self, this fake self. And I think that that's huge and important as well, because that's just trying to get by, and I have a friend and colleague, Jane Miller at WellSpan Philhaven. She said something to me one time, and we actually put it on one of our posters at EAP, and said, instead of trying to get by in life, try to get better. And there are ways to get better. And part of that is reaching out and being able to get connected to support. And so that energy you're talking about there, that you were just pouring into that facade, that's the just trying to get by. I'm just trying to get by. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get through this. And there's also another thing that can happen, and you're also telling us this. If you reach out, you can try to get better.
Yeah, it can happen. For me, well, we'll get into on a different topic, some of the tools, but for me, it's the therapy, the tools that we talk about there, also medication that can help if your doctor can safely prescribe that and everything. And
right.
That's kind of my formula. But I'll tell you what, Mike, a year ago, my smile would have been fake, would have been phony. But I am truly excited for the episodes that we have to come. There's so many topics that we can get into. Really appreciate your time and our partnership with WellSpan. It was, for many years, it's been a match made in heaven between the Revs and WellSpan. But for us to be able to do this is just outstanding. So I can't wait for the next episode and where we go from here. And I would also encourage our listeners, if they want to, contact me through social media or email or whatever, and share their stories. We're not going to share it on the air, don't worry.
Right.
But like, if you want to have that conversation, that's what we're here for. So, and they can do that with me if they want to. I would be happy to hear from people in that regard. That's why we're doing this.
Absolutely. No, I'm so happy and glad to be asked to be a part of this and be able to share this time with you and the listeners and the viewers. I think this is going to be fantastic. So I appreciate you and the courage you've had to even talk about your story. Because I think that absolutely the message is you're not alone, and others will be able to kind of connect with this, I think, at some level. And I think that'll be important. The other thing too, Darryl, I know we talked about this, and we'll make sure that we get these things available too, that we certainly want to make sure that people are reaching out to you, for example, that we give them some resources and things like that they can connect with, and we'll have that for them as well, to be able to access, because we certainly want to create awareness, but we also want to make sure we can connect people to these are things that could be helpful. Much like you're sharing with your story now, you did reach out. You have kind of this kind of recipe that kind of like, this is what works for me, and it's where you are now. Like you said, my smile today is legit, real, and that energy is consistent with being in a better place, better space than where you were a year ago.
Yeah. And let me be clear that through my positive experience, I would rather that they reach out to your team of professionals at WellSpan if they need to. Please do it, because it works. But what I'm saying is, if they just want to have a casual conversation with me as one of the hosts of this program, I certainly welcome that personally. So
fantastic.
So yeah, this has been great, Mike. I can't wait for the next one. And I don't know how many episodes it's going to end up being, but I hope we make a difference, and I feel like we will.
No, I think I'm with you. I think we already have by just having this conversation here today, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate the listeners and viewers checking in with us on this too. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mike. We'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good. All right, you take care.
You too.
For more information on WellSpan Philhaven's tips for good mental health, featuring amazing online tools and apps, as well as tips on staying calm during the pandemic, and videos sharing proven tips on self-care and supporting others during the ongoing pandemic, visit wellspanphilhaven.org. For information on WellSpan's Employee Assistance Program, visit wellspaneap.org. If this is an emergency or you are considering harming yourself, please contact Crisis Intervention at 1-800-673-2496. Additional support is available through the National Suicide Lifeline by calling 1-800-273-8255 or by texting TALK to 741-741. These resources are staffed by crisis professionals and are available 24/7. It's always okay to reach out for help. You're not alone.